Hey, Sean, what's the story with this podcast?
Good question, Sean. It's my understanding that two middle-aged Seans are getting together to decide whether art is shit or not.
Like two Seans in a pod?
Exactly. One Sean knows a lot about art. The other Sean knows a lot about insurance and stuff.
And both are very middle-aged and very Sean.
So, is art shit?
Let's see what Sean has to say about it.
Oh yeah, 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 oh yeah.
A 1,000 hours of staring, a basic blank piece of white paper that's been put in a gallery and called art. It's your job, Sean, to convince me that this is not shit. It's a blank piece of paper on a wall, and the reason we're talking about it is this is the kind of thing that gets people angry about art and calling it shit. It's you go into a gallery expecting one thing, some decent art, and what you get is a blank piece of paper. And I've got some of those at home. Yeah. So how does it suddenly go from a blank piece of paper sitting in a drawer to art?
I guess we need to begin by breaking down the mutually informing elements that make an artwork what it is, which is that there is material and that there is some kind of social context or idea within which to receive or understand that material as art. So you could probably imagine 500 years ago, even an abstract painting, which most of us would recognize as art today, wouldn't have been recognizable as art. This curious transformation that takes place when something which is also a material in the world is taken into the context of art and presented as something else as well.
Tell me there's more to it than a blank piece of paper, Sean.
Well, what does a blank piece of paper outside of the context of art say to you?
Nothing.
Imagine you're a writer or you're an artist that's about to begin a drawing.
The blank piece of paper has potential to have something on it later on.
And is there something terrifying about that potential?
No, that's a difficult question. Potential is the word they label something or somebody with when they haven't achieved anything yet. I have the potential to be the world's greatest violin player. I'm not, but I certainly have the potential. Maybe not at 50. maybe not anymore. I don't know. We can argue the merits of that. But if you haven't done anything, it's just potential.
We don't necessarily know whether Tom Friedman was imagining beginning a drawing, a painting, a piece of writing. Many artists have stared at a piece of paper and wondered where to begin. How do you begin?
And he never got to the answer. 1,000 hours of writer's block for a painter or an artist.
But for many artists and writers, that is a real and very palpable thing, that sense of what writers call writer's block, that sense of stilled potential, that moment in which you're wondering whether there is anything in you. What can you possibly produce here? What can you add to the mountain of writing and drawing that's already been produced? What have you got to offer?
Did he do any of that? That's the question. So as a consumer,
we can only wonder. 1,000 hours of staring. Quite an investment, isn't it?
It is. And, if you picked up a guitar and practiced for 1,000 hours, you would be a pretty good guitarist by the end of it. But has he stared at it is a question. And as a consumer of art, am I being taken for a ride? Sometimes you feel like someone's pulling the wool over your eyes. Here's a couple of questions I'm going to throw at you that might help the conversation. And this is what I think a lot of people think. If I can do, I'm not an artist, and if I can do it, it's either not art at all, or it's very shit art. And I think a lot of people bring that view in and see art like this and go, yeah, that's shit, because I can do it. Or in this case, what's been done? Nothing.
Well, the curious thing about art is that there is what philosophers call a mutual insufficiency at play. There is a material of some form which it serves as a vehicle for conveying the idea of art, and then there is a social context within which one can receive that idea of art. But it's ultimately, like many other things that humans do, it's a fiction. It's a fiction that's presented through material. I guess the stock standard response to your question, I could do it, would be, well, you didn't.
I didn't. Yeah.
And not only didn't you weren't able to place yourself in a context within which there was sufficient consensus for people to buy your fiction.
That's 100% true. Yeah, and this goes to, I think, as we get deeper into this series, we're going to have to answer the question, what is art, and where does that line finish? So what is not art? This blank piece of paper in the drawer in my desk is not art. At what stage does it suddenly transform itself into art because of the context? Now, there's some kind of hard line between not art and suddenly it's art. How do we get to that line?
Well, what is the difference between the existence of a corporation, a nation, a religion, and its non-existence? Is it not people consensually and collectively believing in something?
It's probably a big part of it, yep.
But I mean, does it exist beyond that fictional consensus?
Because it's intangible.
Well, it's superimposed over a geological formation that exists in the physical world. There is land that is contested and claimed as a nation state, but the existence of the nation state, or as I mentioned before, the corporation, is something that exists only insofar as people are willing to believe that it does. Perhaps even money is the greatest abstraction.
Things like corporations and countries or empires, there's this somewhat of a formal framework for, what does a corporation existing means? It means that you've registered it on an official register of corporations, therefore it suddenly exists out of nothing. A country or an empire, there's an international framework of agreement of things like borders and, international zones where you can fish and things like that, because they're written down and there's a framework.
But they're still contested.
Where do I go for the framework about what is art and what is shit?
Well, where is Tom Friedman's blank piece of paper right now?
It's in the Museum of Modern Art. I don't know.
In New York.
In New York, on the fourth floor or something like that on the wall.
Yeah. So, obviously, for better or worse,
someone said it's art.
Well, there's been some kind of collective consensus that has at least enabled this mere piece of paper, to make its way curiously into this sanctioned institutional space, a museum of modern art, and have people stand around and talk about it. But it is still, as is the case with all art, it is still a marriage of some kind of thing in the world, which is a material thing, which is also not art, because it conforms to the laws of physics and it exists in the world, just like a painting is made up of pigment on a canvas or a sculpture is made of rock. And then there is the overlay of this kind of consensus. And we can argue about whether we buy into that idea or not. And perhaps in some ways your contribution is art shit if you're calling it shit art, there's some kind of implicit consensus that it is art.
No, I'm not arguing that it's shit art. What I'm arguing is that at a certain point, it's not art at all. It's shit.
But all art is also not art.
What? No, that can't be right.
If you take any material artifact that is offered up as the vehicle for the art idea in any kind of cultural context, and take it outside of the context of presentation, take it centuries away, take it thousands of years away, and put it in a context where it's divorced from any of the social conventions and ideas that support its presence as a cultural artifact. It's just a thing in the world. People dig up artifacts that are 100,000 years old in Kenya that have strange markings on them. We have no idea what they mean or what they were for, but we can recognize that they were something beyond mere sustenance. Someone had made an abstract marking on something for some reason. Once we push this philosophical idea to its limit, we end up with some blank piece of paper being presented. But in a way, it's demonstrating this rule even more so. You couldn't communicate this idea or this debate that we're having about art without that mere piece of paper and everything that it carries in its conspicuous blankness.
I've described this work from the layman's perspective. Why don't you describe the work fully from an artist's perspective?
Blankness, or the absence of content, is something that has been played with primarily through the 20th century and beyond, although there are predecessors. It can represent everything from this sense of a metaphysical void through to this it's all over, this is the end game, nothing more to see here, where are we going to go from here? So there's a kind of historical language game, or there's this invitation to a metaphysical void. So this sense that something which looks indiscernibly equivalent to, for example, one monochrome painting to another, can, in the context of presentation, be understood to be something vastly different. And of course, there's some sense of what we know about the artist, the context of its production, the context in which it was presented as art that gives us some clue or sense about that. But all of that stuff, as we just established, is a fiction to be contested. Now, there was a famous moment where John Cage went to a studio to visit one of his friends who was working on some blank white canvases. This was Robert Rauschenberg, his friend.
Yeah, I want to talk about, because, from my perspective, or from a layman's perspective, it's the blank white canvases that are really front of mind. Oh, not blank. They're not blank. I will concede that much. They're white house painted on a canvas. And that's where you start with anyone could do that. I could do that. What the hell is this guy trying to pull? And now, but Thomas Friedman, he didn't even paint it. He just stared at it. Like, at least I could make an argument for that. That is a shit piece of art in that it's just white paint. But if you haven't even painted, now I thought that was as far as you could go with this, really pushing the anything can be art argument, just white paint. But when you take away the paint, what are you left with?
Well, that's a great question, because we're seeing, in a sense, the convergence of what were two very separate histories in avant-garde art during the 20th century. One which was abstraction, which led to the as part of its project to the monochrome. And the other was the radical reduction of the act of choosing or selection, which led to the ready-made. And here we see them converging. We see a ready-made piece of paper presented as a monochromatic, blank, contentless piece of art. So what Robert Rauschenberg had made available to his friend John Cage was, in presenting something where there was no apparent content, by looking harder, looking further, happenstance became the content. So the dust that had collected on the surface of Robert Rauschenberg's white painting inspired John Cage to write a performance in which no notes were played. And of course, a musical performance in which no notes are played is not the same thing as experiencing silence without music. And of course, one of John Cage's points was there is no silence, there is always sound around us. But the happenstance that inflected the listening experience became the content. Now, similarly, when we look at a blank piece of paper, we're invited to look beyond that which is literally before us and to think about, what could he possibly be offering us here? Well, there's as I mentioned before, the registration of the production of the work, imagined or otherwise, which is this stilled potential that is encapsulated with this idea of staring. And then there is this blankness presented. So what do we do with blankness? Well, we have to construct everything ourselves, yet we're being invited to do that in a particular way, in a particular context. So it's not the same thing as encountering a blank piece of paper next to the Xerox machine in the office.
Be similar.
But it doesn't annoy you there.
Because no one's trying to tell me it's art.
Yeah, but it's already profoundly different, because you're not holding that piece of paper up and getting annoyed about it, are you?
Well, let me take it back to why I think people don't want to be made a fool of. And that's the risk we're running here when somebody presents something that's so objectively nothing. Now, I'll tell you the story about when my wife and I went to the Museum of Old and New Art in Hobart in Tasmania. Now, this is a awesome museum in that it's in basically a James Bond cave on an island that you get to by ferry, and you go through this dugout tunnel and everything, and they've got art in there that I can understand, and they've got art in there that I clearly can't understand. Yeah, so there's a wall full of what will go into the title of the piece, but a wall full of plaster casts of women's vaginas on the wall, right? So I can get why it's art. It's also really weird. And, in the context of Mona, we're trying desperately to understand art, and some of it we will get and some of it we won't get. So you're in this state of working hard to try and understand things, but there's a lot of confusion going on. And, as we walk through the gallery, there's a room that's kind of roped off. It's got a couple of witches' hats out the front with some yellow tape saying, exhibition room F is closed for refurbishment. And my wife and I look at each other and go, is that the art? Is it a test? Are we supposed to open the door? Or is it just closed? We're in state of confusion trying to understand this art. And is that art, or is that just a room that's being closed for refurbishment? In the moment, we didn't know. We were in that context, just lost. And I think people don't want to be that lost when they're trying to understand art.
That moment you're describing is reminding you that art is continuous with the world. It is, in a sense, it's a fictionalized or philosophical overlay on the world.
Yeah. So the artist in that case was what? The janitor who put the cones out the front of that door and said that the room's closed? Or is he just a janitor?
You were only invited to wonder that as a consequence of being adjacent to art. You wouldn't have asked the same question walking through another building site, would you?
No, not a chance. No.
So that sense of a clear distinction between what was art or not art
100% lack of clear distinction, but does that suddenly turn the janitor into an artist?
No.
Why not?
Well, because there is no collective consensus around the subjectivity, or if we want to cynically call it, brand of that janitor as artist. Just like there isn't for you if you hold up your piece of paper.
But my wife and I stood there looking at those cones and the tape and the sign on the door for a good 5 minutes, trying to figure out, should we push the door open and just check that it's not art? So, not everybody in the museum needs to agree to make it art, just some. Now, there was 2 of us there. We were confused and we felt the same about that janitorial piece that we did about the wall full of vaginas. So some people in that museum thought that was art. Does that make it art?
It just illustrates that the experience of looking at art, even in the faintest sense, can invite you to think about the world around it differently. Because
I feel like I might have got you there a little bit.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. Because there is this sense that there is an artifact, an object, a thing presented together with something that opens up that imaginative space, that space that is also the space of language and of philosophy and of thinking about ideas. What is the difference between any old blank piece of paper and that blank piece of paper? Well, the difference is philosophical.
At it for 1,000 hours and he changed it in doing that. Well, he put it in a gallery and made us look at it, and that changed it into art.
It didn't change it literally, it changed it philosophically.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'll agree with that, because I'm not talking about the 50 sheets of A4 that are sitting in the printer upstairs at my place, that's for sure. Yeah.
So, and similarly, the difference between a work site and a site-specific work, there's an understanding that distinguishes those that can recognise that curious philosophical distinction from those who can't, or those that are labouring to understand it, or those that are battling with it. But that curious philosophical distinction requires some kind of material and some kind of fictional overlay that at least someone receives or agrees with.
Is making people like me outraged at it part of the art?
I don't think so in the case of Tom Friedman. I think there's a sincere gesture here, and I think it's built upon very particular histories, and wouldn't, because you certainly couldn't have imagined a couple of 100 years ago that being presented in a serious museum of art.
I think instead of imagined, I think you were about to say you couldn't have got away with it.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, I agree with that. Now the question is it art? Is it good art, or is it somewhere in that nebulous space between just a piece of paper and shit?
Well, for me, it insofar as I can accept that art exists, and as I explained before, I see it like any other human activity to be constructed fictionally in relationship to materials. I think it's art, and I think it is a sincere gesture. And for me, it says something very interesting about stilled potential. How will you contribute anything more to that towering edifice of human culture? What else can you possibly offer?
I think you've got your work cut out to try to convince me that it's not shit.
Tell me why you think it's shit.
Well, I think it starts with, if I can do it, it's not great art.
Did you do it?
I didn't do it. No, I wish I did do it.
But could you conceivably?
No, there's not a chance. No, I think you've got to have done something. This can't be the first one out of the gates, like a brand new artist, and here I'm presenting nothing to you. Wow, he's a genius. I don't think that's how we roll in the art world.
You're in the art world now.
If I made an attempt to get into the art world, no, I couldn't get away with it because my backstory. So there's a context to the art and where it sits and who agrees with it and all of that, but there's a backstory to the artist as well, right? So a guy who spent 20 years working in insurance doesn't put up a blank piece of paper and be called a genius. That's not how things work.
So we've identified that we need some kind of material, we need some kind of context to presentation, and we need some kind of assumption that there is a subjectivity of some kind behind it that is trying to transmit something to us as art. So we imagine an author or an artist. We imagine that someone has actually produced the work. So they feel like three basic ingredients, don't they?
Yeah, and then there's the viewer or the consumer. That person brings some of their own context and background and knowledge and experience and all of that sort of thing to their viewing of it. Because if you'd never heard of the white paint on canvas, then you'd be even more angry and upset about this blank piece of paper. But I think I was already upset about the white paint, and then it's just taking me like I can't get any shitter than that. Oh, hold on, check out what this guy's produced.
Well, whether we call that person the consumer, the viewer, the beholder, they are also, as you pointed out, they're a necessary part of this transmission of an idea from one consciousness to another through the vehicular medium, in this case of a piece of paper. But something is required in order to transmit that idea from one consciousness to another. And you mentioned the word art world before. The American philosopher Arthur C. Danto actually made it a proper noun in his writing, capital A, art world, he called it, back in the 60s. And he argued that there was this world, just like there are worlds around all the aforementioned religions and corporations and nation states, etc. Humans are invested in this process of world making, but that this art world was something that was necessary for this curious philosophical transformation to take place, where something which can also be understood or recognized as a thing in the world can then assume what we call a doubled ontology and also be seen as art. So it is the fact that it's at once understood or received as art and as something else not only introduces that philosophical dimension, but it also underscores your anger.
I tell you what I do see value in. 1,000 hours is a lot of staring. Now, if you take at face value that the guy has done the work, like he's stared at it for 1,000 hours, and I'm not saying that I do, but let's say you do. There's some thinking to be done about why would you do that? Why? So he's poured 1,000 hours of staring onto this piece of paper for a reason, trying to convey, I think you're trying to convey that idea from him to me as the observer or the viewer. Yeah, there's something in that.
And he's listed it as a material.
The stare
on paper.
Well, I think my favorite thing about this whole piece is, the blank piece of paper there, and then there's the plaque next to it that says medium stare on paper.
And that's important because in a sense, he's saying it's not the piece of paper that's the work. It's the piece of paper that is enabling you to access this very curious sense of a registration of the performance of staring, whether or not we accept that he did or didn't invest that time staring. Now, Arthur C. Danto's proper noun idea of art world has been contested by many people recently because they argue that art isn't something that's cut off from worlds of production and consumption and exploitation and all the other things that happen in the world. Art is continuous with those things. And that janitor is being paid a lot less money. There's a certain privilege and conceit attached to this construction of an art world. It depends upon mere life to exist. It's an overlay, like many of the other things we do. I think we need your final call. I've pleaded my case here. Is it shit, Sean?
I think I've been convinced that it's not shit. And the reason that I will say that is there's something that I really like about it. I love that we don't know whether he stared at it for 1,000 hours. I love the medium of stare on paper. It makes you feel something. So it's something's happening, and that can't be entirely shit. Is it art? Well, I think it's jammed itself pretty much front and center into the conversation, and we're talking about it in the art world. It's ended up in a gallery. There's a lot of consensus around the fact that it's art. Now, doesn't need my agreement to make it art, but I think what we've agreed is it's not shit.
And we've added something to the world of this work by giving it a podcast representation here.
So in summary, not shit. I'm not as upset at it as I was when we started.
And I think you've shifted from anger and irritation through to some kind of contemplative space here.
Not sure about that. I'm not gonna change careers all of a sudden.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.